Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for this very exciting webinar, which is called Pathways to Success, Hiring, Supporting and Retaining Early Career OTs. So I'm Claire Batkin from your OT Tutor. I'm joined by Nicole De La Parel and Angie Contreras as well, and they're going to introduce themselves shortly, and I'll tell you a little bit more about me soon as well. I'm not going to spend too much time on all the formalities, so we're going to get straight into it. Just to let you know, we will be recording this session and it will be made available hopefully within the next day or two. So if you do need to leave early at all, then that's fine. You'll be able to see whatever you miss pretty soon. We will also make the slides available when the recording is available. So if there's any gems of information, don't feel you need to scribble it on there. You'll be able to access those as well. Hopefully we're aiming to get through most of this content within about the hour and a half. So by 8:30 Australian Eastern Standard Time and whatever time zone time that is for whichever time zone you're in. But we can hang around a little bit longer if there's lots of questions that we want to try and get through. And we'll just see how we go with that. But before I go any further, I'd just like to perform an acknowledgement of country. So speaking probably collectively on behalf of all of us, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet and recognise the continuing connection to land, water and community. And we repay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I'm personally joining from Quandamooka land, so pay my respects to those people. Let's get into what are you hoping to learn from this session. So it is a webinar. We're all educators, so we couldn't possibly not include learning objectives at the start of the presentation. So hopefully what you'll learn by the end of this session today, that you'll be able to understand some of the challenges that you'll typically encounter if you're a company that's hiring an early career OT. You'll be able to understand the essential components of supervision and what PD is required to support an early career OT. List some factors that you need to consider when setting billable KPI targets. So it's had its own little learning objective because it is one of the big question talking points that comes up a lot. And then at the end, we'll also outline some appropriate options for outsourcing either some PD or supervision for early career OTs and some other resources that you might be able to use as well. Just a little disclaimer, obviously this is general information only. Everything we present as well, any links that we share later on, it's all accurate at the time of recording in September 2024. If anything changes and you're not quite sure, you're welcome to reach out to any of us and we can give you updated information. And just obviously this is, there's so much, you could spend a whole day, a whole interactive day workshop trying to cover this and you still won't have enough covered. So we're going to do our best just with the main general talking points in about an hour and a half. But at the end, we'll also give you all our contact details and some options if you do want to engage in some individualized coaching or mentoring to help you make the right decisions for your business. That's really what we'll be suggesting as well. But hopefully this will give you that starting point to know if there are any gaps or, specifically what you might need for your company. So I'll tell you a little bit all about us now. So starting with me. So I graduated in 2008 with first class honours and a uni medal. So it's safe to say I've been an OT nerd for a very long time. My experience has been across public and private sectors, inpatient and community caseloads, mostly working with adults. So I'm not a PEDS OT. My background has been across neurosciences, burns, hand therapy, orthopedics, aged care, acute med, rehab, palliative care, pretty much all those rotational type positions that you would do in a hospital. Plus now I'm currently working within the NDIS with an adult caseload. And my experience is mostly within sort of NDIS report writing, and have done some AAT independent assessments for those going up against decisions made at the AAT. I've published and presented my work at national and international conferences on a variety of different topics. I currently work as a sessional academic for ACU, so the Australian Catholic Uni. So that's probably shows sort of my interest in this topic that we're talking about. I work a lot with students in universities and when they're doing their placement. So I know what they're learning and what they basically need to know to connect the dots once they're working as clinicians. And you'll find out pretty soon that both Nicole and Angie have that same background as well. So I launched Your OT Tutor in July 2022. You'll be able to Google me and find everything else that's on my website. I'll give you a little bit of info at the end. But basically, lots of different clinical education, online courses, online journal club, supervision, mentoring, lots of different things that you can check out. Besides that, I'm a bit of a night owl. Got mum duties. I'm hoping I don't hear two little people knocking on the door as I go through this webinar today. But I can understand if you're a business owner that's juggling a whole lot of things, that's me too. So always keep that in mind when I'm giving any advice to business owners. So I'll hand over to Angie. She can tell you about herself.
Thanks, Claire. And just before I do that, I just want to also add, for those of you who don't know about Claire, she has been nominated for Occupational Therapist of the Year 2024 for the Allied Health Business Awards on the 12th of October. So very well deserved nomination. We're very excited to be there, and hopefully you can get it.
Thank you.
All right, so a little bit about me, very similar, I guess, clinical background to Claire, and clinical educator background at university level as well. My clinical experience has been mostly with adults. I spent 6 years working in Dublin in Ireland, and I've been back in Australia for about 10 or 11 years now. University of Sydney experience with associate lecturer as well as clinical education roles. I completed a graduate certificate of higher education a couple of years ago through Sydney Uni, which I really enjoyed. Another, I guess, thing that I bring to the table is I had a couple of years working as an OT learning and development manager, which was a national role for a large allied health provider, which was NDIS specific. So I really got to do a big deep dive on NDIS caseloads and just see how new grads and early career OTs, I guess, what they're exposed to when they're working with those particular caseloads. I've been heavily involved in field rep placement coordinator roles, both at a site level. So in the various jobs that I've worked at, I've worked for public health, non-for-profits, the public sector, and amongst all those roles that I've had, I've been involved in coordinating student placements, and I've also put the hat on from the uni side, coordinating placements and being that point of contact at uni for students that are out doing their placements. I've been running mentoring programs for OTs since 2021. So I have groups of OTs working in small teams that I supervise, as well as individual OTs around the country. And my clinical area is in complex home mods as well as neuro. And the people that I'm supervising and mentoring at this stage are a combination of new grads, early career OTs, as well as some OTs that have experienced burnout and are re-entering their profession and have looked for that additional support, as well as very specific clinical supervision around the complex home mod space. Yep, so that's me. I'll hand over to Nicole.
Okay. So I guess a bit like Claire calls herself an OT nerd, and I would probably say that I'm a little bit the same as well, and a little bit of a uni nerd in that as well. So I have been an OT for over 20 years. I've also got some professional I guess, postgraduate qualifications. So I'm a driver trained occupational therapist. I have a professional certificate in practice education, which is like clinical education, and a master of clinical rehab in neuro OT. And so, yeah, I guess I have that, you know, that kind of academic background. I do work as well at Flinders University within the OT program and also our postgraduate program. And so I guess similar to Claire, able to see, I guess, what the new grads might be seeking. And but I also get that beautiful benefit of seeing them kind of come back for some postgraduate education as well and kind of see where they're at and catch up with kind of how their career perhaps has progressed and provide some additional input in terms of building those specific skills in particular areas as well. My clinical expertise is with adolescents and adults with physical and neuro conditions, including persistent pain, chronic pain, amputation, stroke, brain injury, MS and Parkinson's disease, and have in that driver OT role, I guess, as well, seen many other conditions, including a lot of autism and intellectual disability coming through at the moment as well. I've been an OT manager and a lead OT and OT team leader in both public and private organisations. So I have an understanding, I guess, at that employment perspective. I've been on lots of interview panels and engaging OTs to come and work in big private practices, and I guess have an understanding having to be the one of supervising and supporting people to attain their billable target and things. So being able to see, I guess, some of those things that might lead to some success from that side of things. In my my own private work currently at the moment, I am Encourage OT, is what my business is, and I provide OT services as well as mentoring and clinical supervision, which I provide for OTs across Australia. And I also do a lot of consulting, training and professional development as well in that space with businesses. I have a particular interest in burnout. I've been through burnout myself a couple of years ago, and Encourage OT kind of came out of, I guess, that space of wanting to really build an OT career that was going to meet my personal needs rather than, I guess, the other way around. So yeah, so I guess I have a real passion for wanting to prevent, support others for preventing burnout as well. And I'm seeing, I guess, a lot of OTs, young OTs that are unfortunately experiencing burnout, and sometimes might be seeking supervision or mentoring maybe a little bit late in that process. And so this was really, I guess, a little bit of a collaboration from Claire around what can we do to kind of get in sooner, and what can we do to get in at some different angles to really kind of, I guess, support that pathway to success. So thank you for having me.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Nicole. So you can see, hopefully you have chosen some people with the right experience. So we've lived it sort of into trying to develop new grad programs ourselves, see what they're learning at university, have posted them as students on placements, and are dealing with them now when they're struggling as new grads. So we want to try and give the business owners the education of how they can try and avoid some of those things from happening. So let's launch into a bit of content. What we'll start with is just very big picture overview of the process of hiring an OT and sort of the support, or basically what happens at each stage. But how we've structured this webinar is that we've got 10 myths that we want to bust about what it takes to actually support an early career OT. And there's 2 myths basically for each of these little phase that you'll see here. And a big shout out to Julie Carla, who's in the crowd, who actually put this together, and that was our jumping off point for working out what we're actually going to do to cover this very important topic. So we're going to go through it in a bit more detail, but we'll start with the pre-recruitment. So there's lots of things you actually need to think about before you actually put that ad on Seek or on LinkedIn or whatever it is to hire your early career OT. So you need to really clarify the role, the scope, the duties, what hours are going to work, how it's going to work location wise, but most importantly, mapping that against your business and practice needs. So what are you actually trying to achieve through your business? Because sometimes when you think about that in detail, hiring an early career OT isn't the option to actually achieve that. Then we'll move on to some recruitment myths, and that's all about clarifying, communicating what the OT role will actually involve, and making sure you've got a good role description, be really clear on what sort of experience you'll need your OT to have based on what sort of duties you want them to do, and really go into that recruitment process, not just hiring the first person that shows any sort of interest. You really need to choose the right person for the job, or you're really just setting yourself up and that person for failure. Then we'll move on to some onboarding and orientation, and that's really focused around making sure there's a graded build up of their caseload and their schedule. Also talking about what are some of those essential components that need to go into that. So that includes things like observing other team members, and having a really clear sort of schedule and built-in time where they're not just stuck doing all this clinical work straight away from the first few days, clarifying what those non-clinical expectations can be as well. And then once they're sort of a little bit settled in, then the focus really should be around their supervision and how you're monitoring their performance. So that's including scheduling protected supervision time. Hopefully it's with a supervisor who they haven't just been dumped with, or who's been dumped with them, someone that actually is going to give that a really valuable learning experience both ways. Be able to schedule and be clear about what's expected, and really reflecting on, if they're building their competencies. And then finally, hopefully if you've done all those steps well, this last bit should be easy. It's all about retaining that person. We all know that it takes a lot more money and effort to hire someone new than it is to keep the staff that you've got. So hopefully some of the things that we'll talk about in that stage is all about giving them opportunities for that career progression that's actually suitable for an early career clinician, and, you know, consolidating their learning and making sure that they're basically wanting to stay and that you're facilitating that. So thank you to Julie for setting that up. We're going to launch into each of those steps now. We're going to start with the pre-recruitment myth busting. And this is, like I say, it's all about considering if a new grad is actually really right for your business and what those early things are going to involve. And I'll introduce the first myth, and Angie is going to tackle this one for us. It's called, the myth is, hiring a new grad OT is an easy way to build business income. Isn't it, Angie? Perfectly easy.
Yeah. Yeah, so okay, with this, I just feel we needed to really get the point across about the significant initial investment that's required to then be able to reap the benefits at the end. But that additional investment goes beyond your staff member's base salary, and that's really essential to set them up well. And the kind of things we're talking about are things like on-the-job training. So when you're factoring that in, it's the cost that the cost for the person that's going to be providing the training, whether you've got someone internally within your company that's going to have to take time out of their day or perhaps their billable time to provide the training, but also the time of your new grad or new starter, time away from billable and clinical work to complete that training. And then you've got CPD courses, you know, formal supervision, which is essential for anyone that's RPRO registered. We need to do our 30 hours to acquire 30 points. And CPD courses for new grads could look like formal attendance at face-to-face workshops, or it could look like online, like seeking online platforms and webinars, self-paced courses that are available. And there's fantastic OT designed and created resources and training opportunities out there, like beyond OT Australia. So OT Australia, our governing body, does put out fantastic learning and training opportunities, but there's a lot of other, like you've got Claire, for example, that does her beautiful FCA work, and yeah, a lot of other things that OTs can tap into. Shadowing opportunities with other clinicians. So again, time taken for the new grad to be shadowing and learning on the job from someone else, acknowledging that if they do that, they won't be then also able to claim and invoice for that session if someone else is doing that. The cost of supervision. So the costs of, again, having someone internally, an OT, that can provide that clinical supervision. And I can't emphasize enough the point of having an occupational therapist provide supervision for another occupational therapist. I've heard of cases and examples of where that doesn't happen. And so new grads might be offered supervision, but it's not coming from someone that's the same, not the same profession. So, so the time commitment for supervision is also needing to be factored in into this phase. So having a more senior or experienced OT available to provide weekly supervision for the first 12 weeks is really, really important. Having another new grad or another new starter to provide that supervision is not appropriate. It's if you've got two people that are on the same learning phase of their career, it's super important to have someone that's already walked that path and that has significant level of clinical experience to be able to provide that weekly supervision. And I think the 12 weeks weekly for some people might seem like a lot if you're thinking of the money and the investment that going into providing that. But the reality is that's what's going to really set things up well for that new grad. Having someone for that first 3 months that they can go and debrief about clinical cases and not just about how they're managing their caseload and how they're keeping up with the calendar management and how they're getting on with their reports and things like that. It needs to be very specific to like the clinical caseload that they're managing. And then from that, ongoing supervision is essential for the first 12 months. And that can really look like formal one-on-one sessions, as well as regular report reviews, particularly for those OTs that are working the mixed caseload NDIS, and we're very heavy on report writing. So you'll have the peds clinic OTs where this might not apply as much because they're providing intervention more regularly. But for the rest of the new grads, having someone review reports, provide feedback is really important, because ultimately those reports are being submitted and released out to clients and the NDIS or referrers. And if they're not at the right level, and if they're not providing accurate recommendations, it can really set things back, not just for the new grad, but for the company they're representing, and I guess the reputation that you're trying to develop as a business. The next slide. So the risks of I guess, insufficient training to start off with. So this can lead to poor quality reports, which then lead to insufficient clinical recommendations. And that's really worst case scenario. If you've got a report that's going out and it hasn't really captured the client's profile very well, it can lead to poor clinical outcomes, and yeah, it's a recipe for disaster. Increased client and referrer expectations may not be met. So it's a big pressure to be placing on a new grad, to be delivering high quality clinical services such as interventions, assessments, and report writing without that supervision in place and that training on the job. So another risk is potential loss of referrals and reputation. So again, we know what happens when people are not satisfied with what they've paid for, and the feedback can start to filter back about that dissatisfaction. And again, it's a lot of pressure for a new grad to be hearing negative feedback on work that they're doing if they've not been supported enough or don't have the right skill set to be actually delivering those services. And then long-term benefits versus short-term gains. We really want to emphasize the expecting a longer ramp-up time for OTs before they can achieve independence in managing their caseload. Those first 12 weeks, it's really important to set the foundations, but beyond that, they're still going to be needing access to supervision and support for the first 12 months and beyond as they become more proficient and more experienced and confident. So yeah, I just can't emphasize how much importance should be placed on that support and mentorship in the first 12 months.
Excellent. Thank you, Angie. So hopefully that's impressed on you. That's not actually cheap. But I don't know, did we have a figure in mind in terms of if you added all those up? Obviously, it's a ballpark.
Yeah.
Actually, on top of a salary, just to throw it out there to people.
Yeah. Like you're looking at minimum, I would say $10,000 to up to 20 and 30. Like if you're doing it well, and that's for all of those like little bits and pieces that I mentioned before. Like if you're factoring in hourly rates for other clinicians to provide training and hourly rates for the new grad to be attending training, like like actually paying and paying for them to be receiving formal supports and training, it does add up. And when that lacks, when that's not there, it's just gonna it's a snowball effect of things not working out and damage to reputations, but also damage to the business and the OT's confidence as well. And like I said, worst case scenario, our clients are not getting the best service that they deserve.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to the next myth. Which is what we're sort of getting. You need to get your head around what sort of services you think that this OT is actually going to provide, and does it actually match what you're trying to achieve with your business? What sort of clientele and referrals you've already got waiting for you? You don't want to hire someone thinking they can tackle everything, basically. And how many things you can schedule into their caseload. So the myth is around billable work and what it's face-to-face. So the majority of OT billable work is usually face-to-face. That's sort of, sometimes I think for other professions that's definitely the case, but OT is quite different. So I'll let Angie tackle her thoughts on that one.
Yeah. So I would say, with the exception as well of clinic-based therapies as well, like pediatric services, that are offering those clinic appointments, and OTs are scheduled to see clients, regularly throughout that day. but even for those OTs, there are requirements if they need to be providing reports for NDIS on their, progress reports on the 12 weeks of therapy they've just completed and things like that. That needs to be factored in. Generally, what we're finding with OTs working in the community setting, non-clinic setting, non-clinic setting with a mixed caseload, there's a significant time that's being spent on report writing and documentation, which is all billable. But when we're looking at FCAs, which are, I guess, the more basic of the NDIS reports that we're asked to submit, we're asking for 10 hours at minimum, sometimes 15 hours to complete that whole assessment, but most of that time is spent on the report. The other times that are billable and should be invoiced and factored in are the frequent liaison that we're having to do with stakeholders. And that's if we're truly working with that MDT lens, which we should be with our clients that have multiple people involved in their cases, support coordinators, case managers, family members, as well as a collaboration that we're having with other team members to discuss client care and strategies, and phone calls and emails for coordination. So all of these things, we try, like when I've had new grads in my team, I try to emphasize a lot around the importance of planning ahead and having really good calendar management. But the reality is that sometimes you can plan so well, but you can't plan for unexpected phone calls and emails and urgent requests for things that then need to be, you need to factor that into your day and then into that particular week. And then comparison of work settings. Yeah, so I've already mentioned about the pediatric caseloads and how there's a difference there. But the reality is we are, I guess we wanted to put this in for potential business owners that are not too familiar with OT and are not sure as to what an OT days look like. We do have a calendar, a sample calendar in the next slide, just to kind of show you roughly what an OT, a typical week might look like for a new grad. And as you can see, there's a combination of activities happening in this particular week. There's assessment. So there's the code here is green for billable. So anything that's green, assessments, there's reviews, there's phone calls, liaisons, there's assisted technology trials, there's stakeholder meetings via Zoom, intervention, living skills sessions. So there's a mix of clinical, and as you can see, there's such a big variety. Like even in that little snapshot of that week, there's everything from assessment to intervention, report writing. Then we've got the purple, which is partially billable. So working on an FCA report, the actual writing and putting things down, we might only be able to invoice 2 hours. However, interpreting standardized assessment scores, maybe liaising with another member of the family to gather more info to add to the report. You can be looking at a 4-hour window of an OT doing that work, and the output would be a section of the report, but only 2 hours can be invoiced. I think Claire's mentioned to us before that we've heard stories of new grads spending a lot of time on these cases, which as they would and as they should in terms of assessing and putting things together, but also then not realizing that they can't invoice and bill for all of that time. So there's a risk there that you're overcharging and could be seen as over servicing if an invoice goes out for 20 hours where it really should be a 10-hour invoice. And then the non-billable stuff here is orange. Allocated PD time. Oh no, that's the yellow, sorry. The yellow is a highlighted PD support, supervision, case conference, research, individual learning. Do you want to add anything else to this one, Claire?
Yeah, no, so I kind of threw this at Angie at the last minute. This is one of my slide examples, but it's basically just trying to put into just what Angie is saying, that some days may be quite heavy with what they can actually bill for, but then there might be days where it's like, oh, really only a couple of hours of that day can be billable. And like Angie was saying, if the purple, they could spend 5 hours trying to get their head around an FCA report. The total thing might take them 20 hours to write their first FCA report, and yet an experienced clinician in your team, if they were to do it from scratch, would do it in 10 hours. So, and that's what Andrew was getting at in terms of if the reason it's taking so long is because they're writing a bit and then they're going back to that FCA course that they watched, or they're going back to look at somebody else's example report, you can't bill for that time and not get questioned for it, basically, and wonder like, well, why did I get the new grad? Now it's costing me twice as much as if you'd just given me the experienced OT on your team. So this is sort of where it's like you need to allocate them the time to learn, because that's the only way they'll get quicker, and the only way they'll learn is if they've got that space to spend 20 hours on their first FCA, but just you need to factor into what you're billing for, that it's not fair to the participant, and you're likely to be questioned if you did bill for that whole time when some of it is actually their learning, and that's sort of the business cost associated with it. And I think some of these other things will probably be clearer later on as well, like you say, oh, there's weekly supervision, but there's also a line management discussion. I know Nicole's going to talk about the difference between that and why they need to be separate as well. So yeah, you can have a look at that in a bit more detail when we put the slides out, but it's just factoring those things and knowing that, you know, an initial assessment is like a 3-hour window because there's travel either side and 2 hours need to be booked in. So please don't give them 3 initial assessments on the first day. And I think if you look in this in more detail, you'll see there's probably only, I think, 7 different clients, and yet they're still probably billing for 20 hours for a week. And when we get to KPIs, we'll talk about that, but that's probably pretty decent for a new grad a couple of months in. So you don't need to jam pack their schedule, I suppose, is what we're getting at here, like if it was a clinic-based role. So okay, thanks Angie for covering that. We'll get moving to the next section. So that was all the pre-recruitment things to consider, basically just trying to visualize what an OT working in your company might look like, and if it's actually the right fit for you, and do you have space to actually give them that time. But the next phase is recruitment myth busting. So this is a little bit more about the actual reality of hiring a new grad OT, and again sort of building a little bit more about what you can expect them to do. This time we're going to have Nicole tackling these myths. So the first myth that we've got is that OTs come out of uni ready to take on any referral with distant supervision. Obviously we're saying that a little bit sarcastically because we know that that's not the case at all, but I'm going to let Nicole tackle this one.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, so we've put this one in here, I guess, around trying to get some clarity and some consistency in, I guess, the expectations that we have for new grad OTs, and being clear on that, I guess, in that recruitment sort of component of the journey, is because we need to be clear about that in your interviewing, when you're interviewing for a position, what are you actually expecting of that new grad and what are you offering for that? And then that part of that means that you need to be clear about what it is that you're actually expecting of the person that's going to come on board and work for you. So it's really important to know that, I guess, universities teach graduates foundation skills and how to think like an OT. They, I guess, as a university educator, you know, I know intricately what our courses cover, and I can say that we're not able to include all possible clinical scenarios and situations that somebody might experience in a clinical setting. OT is really broad, so you might be employing someone to come and work in the adult space, but that individual is going to have learnt about children. They're going to have learnt about all sorts of different scope within their university degree, but they're not necessarily going to be able to hit the ground running and be able to be a fully fledged, you know, experienced therapist that's able to deliver everything right from the get-go. And so I've included this. This is from the World Federation OT. There's a little, I guess, little diagram over on the side that sort of talks about what the foundation skills, the knowledge, skills, and attitudes for competent practice. So the World Federation of Occupational Therapy sets this standard that for all accredited OT degrees to achieve. And so all OTs and OT programs have to include education around the person, the environment, the occupation relationship, the value of occupation to health and well-being, establishing therapeutic relationships, an OT process and how to approach clients that's collaborative, people-centered, as well as being occupation-focused, and also includes professional reasoning and behaviour, the context of professional practice, and application of evidence. And so it means that your graduate OTs are able to think like an OT and apply a framework to many different situations. But it doesn't mean that they've been exposed to all of those situations or have a high degree of competence in every situation and clinical situation. So in particular, some of those that we've kind of flagged that really probably wouldn't be appropriate to throw at a new grad OT would be complex and high-end assistive technology and home modification prescription, for example. So OTs, new grad OTs are not complex home modification assessors, because to be operating within scope for that, you need to have experience. That's what the requirement is. We would suggest that new grad OTs would not be suitable to do supported disability accommodation or supported independent living assessments in the NDIS space, because they're complex. And one of the things that the World Federation's sort of scope, includes local context and local situations. And so that's, means that, of course, not every OT degree is going to include things like that. It is going to depend a little bit on individual universities and how they've structured their programs to meet the needs of individual and local organisations in their area. So not all will include a huge component of NDIS specific things. I think there's many of us in this space that, and I have the beauty in my particular role that I'm employed as a teaching specialist clinician, so I'm able to kind of bring in what I know is needed in the clinical space into some of that education, but not all universities are going to include a high degree of current practice in terms of things that have been, developed by funding bodies, for example, because it's just not feasible for that to be included in a university degree, as it's specific and changes all the time, even for experienced therapists to know how to deal with some of these kind of stuff. Obviously, things like medico-legal report writing, where there's a high degree of specificity that's required, and again, a high degree of experience to be able to deliver those recommendations confidently. And perhaps things that, particularly difficult or complex clients might include people that have difficult behaviours or complex family dynamics that really just load up the pressure on a new grad OT who still might be learning how to deliver the intervention effectively, but then might struggle in those sort of more complex situations. They're just a few examples. There's many other examples. I guess my encouragement would be that be guided by an experienced OT about what would be suitable scope of practice, and also allow a new graduate to identify their scope. So part of what OTs are taught is to understand that OT is broad and that we include lots of things, and that to also be reflective practitioners and to be lifelong learners. That's built into the degree, and be able to seek out evidence and do research and things like that, but be guided by them about what they feel confident and competent to deliver, and that they can do in a safe and supported way. And that would really be, my encouragement to ensure that you're clear that your expectations are not too high, and that you're able to, show that when you're recruiting for therapists to work for you.
Excellent. Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, I think that's definitely the take home, is if you're not an OT and you don't actually know what an SDA report is, trust me, it's like a 50-page document that needs to be medico-legal style and that needs to address legislative requirements. I don't even like tackling them and barely do them. And my expertise is report writing. So, it's definitely not something to be just thinking that, oh yeah, we can say yes to everything. So you definitely need some sounding board to be able to judge that. So we'll keep going with another myth, again, about sort of selecting that right OT and knowing what you can expect them to do. So it's that years of experience and previous placements are a good indicator of OT competency. So basically, if you read the resume like, oh yeah, they had an 8-week placement at NDIS. Oh yes, they were a team leader a year. Like 1 year out, they must be awesome. Sometimes it's not exactly the picture that tells the true story. So I'll let Nicole again talk about this one.
So again, a little bit of what I've touched on already, that part of an occupational therapy degree, there are mandated amount of quantity of hours, of practice hours that need to be achieved across a degree that are set by the World Federation of OT. And those hours are very high, but again, they're also across all areas of practice in occupational therapy. And so it might not be, I guess, in if they've had field placements, they may not be in the area that the OT particularly enjoyed, or in the area that they might be seeking employment. So you know, I did a field placement in my own degree. I did 2 project placements as part of my my field practice hours. And look, at the time, I quite enjoyed doing projects. I've never worked in project management since, and wanted to be a clinical OT as my first job out of university. So, you know, if you're relying on the person's, I guess, field placement experience to set what they're going to be able to do, that cannot always be accurate. Field placements are learning experiences. They're not a demonstration of clinical competence. So even when you might be seeking, I guess, referees, if someone's provided a referee for you know, from their field placement, and that referee report might be quite positive, but it might also have identified some challenges for the individual. That's okay, because most placements are that learning opportunity. They're still learning and responding to feedback and growing and developing from that. They're not there to demonstrate clinical competence as an OT in their undergraduate degree. And those field placements might have indicated some strengths and some weaknesses. So it's around how might that be applicable to that work setting, but being clear that I guess that competence, that experience might not mean that they're, you know, going to hit the ground running, for example, in your field. So just because they had a 4th-year field placement in the same area as the role that they're seeking employment doesn't mean that they're still going to be able to hit the ground absolutely running. Okay, so I guess what we would sort of say, I guess our recommendations for that is that we should check competence and experience in the recruitment process through the use of case studies, for example, as questions as part of the interview, because you know the kinds of clients that you might be having in your workplace that you want your occupational therapist to see. And so seeing whether, I guess, the therapist can come up with some of the, I guess, ideas as to how to work through that case scenario that's relevant to your organisation. We would also encourage that you have an experienced occupational therapist on the panel. So if you don't have an OT that works in your organisation, seeking an external person to sit on the panel that has that relevant OT background and experience, because they might sound like they have answered that case study great, but perhaps there were things that might have been missed in that situation. And I've sat on panels before for organisations, and you know that I haven't worked for, and it's always a really enjoyable experience to do that and to be able to contribute positively, to be able to see what comes from that. We would encourage checking references, but I guess around that concept of clarifying the specific experiences that the person had. So if they've put on their, you know, on their application that they had that they've had FCA experience, was it, you know, generally it's not going to be independently completing that. It might be under close supervision and support, but clarifying exactly what that looked like. Was it that they sat in on an FCA but didn't actually do anything further with that? Or was it that they had to go with doing part of the assessment questions? Or was it that they had to go with writing up part of the report? What you're probably more going to want to look for is, what was their learning like? What was their response to feedback? How were they able to take on the advice through those placements? And how is that relevant for then being able to start a new role? Are they someone that takes time to adjust, or do they need a lot of support and supervision? What was the styles of supervision that worked best for them? Did they like to, you know, did they have a learning style that meant that they liked to observe first and then get stuck into things? Did they like to, you know, try it first but have oversight? That's the kind of information that's going to be really helpful to be able to decide whether the person is going to be a good fit from their placement experiences, not necessarily the specific locations and environments and settings that they were actually in. And as Claire mentioned, that's also, I guess, in the case of people that might have had a first role out or first couple of roles out, because sometimes new grads the choices and decisions that they make about those first few roles are often not driven by, this is the best job or the best fit for me, or the, you know, the best role that I want to have. It's, I need a job because I've just been studying for 4 years and I need to make some money, and this was the person that offered me a job. You know, it might be that sometimes that they were a sole OT and or perhaps only 1 or 2 OTs, and then the team leader left, and then they got, you know, sort of put into that team leader position. It doesn't mean that they were successful or doing well in that particular position. So being cautious, I guess, about that experience and really seeking that information about, I guess, their capacity for learning and growth and their capacity to be a good fit in how that's applied within your organisation.
Excellent. They're great points, Nicole. And I think, like I say, if you do all that digging deeper, because I think at the moment that business owners can fall into the trap of being so desperate to find an OT that they were like, oh, yep, applicant, take them. I don't care, don't interview, just take them. But really what we've found as well is that backfires for the employer. So they might be like, no, we'll make it work, it's fine. Invest a whole lot of money at external supervisors courses only for the new grad for it all to fall apart, and then you've lost that money and you've lost that time, versus holding out and, like Nicole says, a little bit more digging to find the right fit. And even if you do a bit of digging, it says, well, actually no, they weren't able to do that, but you get lots of positives about their attitude, their ability to take on feedback, their learning. Doesn't mean that they're not the right fit. It just helps you to prepare for what you might need to provide, and it might still be doable for your company. So yeah, definitely one of that temptation to not say yes. Just like the new grads were, I think probably 10 years ago, new grads just say yes to whatever job is thrown at you, versus now it's the employers that are just saying yes to the first new grad that's thrown at them. Try to hold back and think about that a little bit more carefully. Okay, so the next part is all about onboarding myth busting. So this is the juice, I suppose, that everyone's here for, the big magic word of KPIs and billable targets. I'm not tackling this one. I'm going to get Angie to tackle this one. So it's basically talking all about this. We've got a couple of myths around KPIs, how to set them, what's reasonable. So our first one is that there's a specific billable KPI that's reasonable for all early career OTs to aim for. I think this is probably one of the number one questions asked in forums, is like, what's the reasonable KPI for a new grad? And it's like, how long's a piece of string? So Angie, what would you say about this?
Oh gosh. Thanks, Claire. Yes, it's a very hot topic question that gets asked a lot. So it gets asked by new grads, it gets asked by employers. And I think what's really important to factor in is the workplace setting that you're offering, and everything that Nicole just said about the competencies that these new grads or early career OTs come to you with. And once you've got a really good understanding of that, and also, I guess, how your business is operating, and there's going to be a difference between a very small private practice compared to like a national allied health provider, in terms of how it's structured and how the new grads fit into that. But I think it's really difficult to apply one universal KPI that would fit all new grads or early career OTs. And the reasons are I'll go through them in this slide. So in terms of the factors, if you're looking at client load variability, so the number of clients that the OTs are seeing, if an early career OT or new grad is working in a setting where they have a lower client load, their KPIs will naturally be different from someone in a high volume clinic. So the example that I used before was about working in a peds clinic, compared to a community setting where they may only be able to see a handful of clients each day due to travel time and the nature of home visits. And I know myself, when working in the community space, the most number of home visits that I've ever scheduled myself for would be 4, and that's really stretching it. To anyone that's worked in community, you'd be going, okay, like 4 visits plus the travel in between. And usually, if I did that, it would have been trying to maintain within the same geographical patch to kind of see a few clients in the same area. But the practicalities of managing that is one thing. But the mental load that goes with having to see 4 different clients and either assess or provide intervention, then you're driving around and then you have to do your progress notes and things like that. There's a lot that is going on for an experienced OT, let alone someone that's less experienced. The other point here is admin support. I can't emphasize strongly enough how important it is to have really good admin support in a way that can maximize the staff's ability to do their clinical work. And so if they are going to be doing a lot more admin heavy tasks as part of their general duties, that's going to impact their billable hours. And by admin support, we're talking about things like handling intake and screening referrals. If there is no clinician that's taking in those screening referrals, and if you've got admin, just general admin that are taking those referrals but not understanding, and then having to pass them along to an OT to kind of filter it through and determine if the referral is even appropriate, that in itself, you can end up an hour just managing that aspect of whether you accept a referral or not. Scheduling is another thing. So booking in appointments and booking in travel and factoring all of that in. As an experienced OT, you kind of get the hang of how long it takes you to travel, factoring in parking, factoring in walking, between your car and the house, and having to stop at McDonald's for toilet visits and all of that scheduling. New grad OTs just do not understand the concept of that because they've never really had to do it. And even if they've had a placement in that setting, a lot of that stuff has been taken care of by supervisors that are creating an environment where they can go and the students can do their placement and not worry so much about the admin stuff. Documentation that's not billable. So that's administrative task that includes having to input data, like create new files on a data management system. That all takes away, and that can't be invoiced. Organizing follow-ups, anything that's a conversation that you're having with someone that is not really clinical, that's not addressing any clinical need. Without that sort of level of support, it can really impact the new grad's ability to maintain or achieve a set hour of KPI per day or per week. And the last thing here is the complexity of the referrals. So this greatly affects what is reasonable for an OT to aim for. Complex cases such as those involving clients with like multiple health issues, disability needs. I think factoring in that NDIS clients on their, I don't want to say they're more complex than other clients, but the nature of people's disabilities and the nature of the way that the system is set up, the way that the NDIS is set up, that in itself, those two factors alone just create a complex situation for a new grad to have to manage assessment and identifying occupational barriers and then making recommendations and then implementing a plan, that combined with how do I do it under this particular scheme. And as we all know, at this point in time, 10th of September, we are transitioning from old legislation to new legislation, and we're all a little bit unsure as to what that's going to look like in a few weeks. But that in itself can really change and impact a new grad's ability to maintain a set number of KPIs. And if clients are particularly complex, new grads will need to spend more time to wrap themselves around that case. And the time could be on like the supervision that they're having to have with a supervisor, plus their own independent research on that particular diagnosis, or looking at best practice guidelines around how they should be, the recommendations they're making, if they're current, and what else they should be considering. So that in itself just adds a lot. And as we said earlier, going back to that calendar, 5 hours on one case, but the output could only be 2 hours of invoicing, that impacts things. And I would also like to say just the mental load again of handling complex cases needs to be factored in. I know I've worked in environments as a clinical team leader with like junior therapists, and you see them walk in after lunch and they've just had a heavy client visit and they're just completely you can't get much work out of them in the afternoon. They need to be doing something that requires less brain power because they're just so like drained, whether it's mentally, emotionally, just like clinically, just going through their head, processing all of that. And they've said to me, like I've had examples of many of them, I just can't really do anything right now because I think I'll get it wrong, and we just have to renegotiate what tasks they might be able to still manage for the afternoon and then start fresh the next day. All right, next slide. So tailored KPI setting. So so going back to being more individualized on specific circumstances. I think, it's great to have achievable targets for people. It's great for them to be able to know that they're working towards something. But I think it's also important to just keep an eye on what those targets are and whether you need to renegotiate those targets based on what's going on, and considering other factors like the ones that I've mentioned right now, to make sure that they are realistic and fair. I think we've all heard, and when I say all, Claire, myself, Nicole, and Julie, we've all heard stories and reflections from new grads as to how intense and how stressed they feel with the talk of KPIs and billable targets, and how that pressure just impacts their day to day. Because they want to be seen as, a good worker and hitting particular targets. But for some of them, it can be very difficult to get into a flow. And also everything else that we've kind of talked up to this point does impact their ability to do that well. There are different models of working in private practice, I should say, that are not necessarily involving a KPI. So I'll leave that for now, but I will say that there are, various different companies that are trialing different ways of maintaining achievable outputs through their clinicians that don't involve actually setting a KPI at all. That might sound really foreign and confusing to business owners who are used to having set KPIs, but I know of a couple of successful companies and providers out there that don't have KPIs and they're thriving. So focus on the quality of care that's been provided, and I think encouraging them to succeed in their roles and meet the diverse needs of their clients should really be the emphasis as they start. All right, next.
Okay, well, I think we've got another myth for Angie now, which is still on the topic of KPIs, but more the ramp up. So the myth is that new grads should be reaching the same billable KPI target as an experienced OT within 3 months. So say you've got an experienced OT with 4 or 5 years experience and their target's 25 hours a week. Some companies believe that it's okay for a new grad to be aiming for that in that 12-week, 3-month mark. What would be your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so with this one, we're looking at building their skill and their ability to be an effective worker at the right pace. So having these graded expectations, new grads require more time to adapt to the role and understand the company culture, understand the structures and the systems that they're working under, develop time management and calendar skills. Not all new grads or early career OTs, that's like an extra skill that is developed with practice. And if some of those team members have come to you with experience in the private sector, they probably would have been exposed to that already. But if they haven't, this is a complete new, like a very foreign concept for some people to get their heads around. And that does take time for them to be like really independent with doing that. And it could mean that you're looking at the first few weeks of, you don't want to be micromanaging, but in terms of like supporting that skill, and that might look like being more involved in how they manage their calendar and how they learn to prioritize tasks, and then guiding them to then be able to do that themselves, and then weaning yourself away. But you need to be mindful of that. And the induction period, I guess, just some thoughts on what you should be focusing on for the first 12 weeks. So, basic introduction to the role of the company is important. The workplace protocols and practices, they really need to learn what they are and how they operate. And I guess there will learn that not just by reading the staff employee handbook, but just being part of the workplace and seeing how other people work, and being accepted by the team, and being involved in team meetings, and even like non-clinical catch-ups and things like that, to just learn to build a little bit of a relationship with the people they're working with. The other thing is managing a small caseload. So not expecting a new grad to just hit the ground running from the first few weeks and know like how to do that by themselves, because managing a small caseload, there's a lot of skills involved in that. So we really need to think about having a graded approach to that, managing the complexity of the referrals. And I guess if you do have clinicians on board that are helping with screening referrals and determining complexity, then you're having a better sense of what's being allocated to a new grad, and knowing that if they've got, quite a heavy caseload of complex clients, they might not be able to have as many clients to work with at this particular time. And just always managing and keeping an eye on that, because it's very easy for their caseload to just explode. And the next thing you know, they've got 10 complex clients they're working with. You've got phones ringing, emails, people chasing them up for reports or an update. And that's really stressful for them. And then focus on repeating service types or diagnosis to build confidence and competence. So I think that's something that's come up in our previous conversations between like Claire and Nicole, around, the more practice and exposure they get to a certain type of referral or a certain type of client, that it's going to set them up better to just become more proficient and quicker at those types of referrals. I think FCAs, if you've got a team that's working with NDIS mixed caseloads, like FCA referrals are really good for new grads, because they involve that really deep dive information gathering part of what we do, and really getting to know our clients, and then putting their reports together. So you're getting a really good skill set that you can build on. It's difficult to go straight into interventions or different parts of OT without having really good assessment skills and practicing those. Or if possible, if you're getting referrals and you notice that there's a bit of a regular diagnosis that's coming through. I know I do that for my team. Like I've got one of my team members that he gets a lot of the Parkinson's cases, and it was just out of initially we weren't even thinking about it, but as they come on, he's actually built his skills really well in working with people with Parkinson's, because he's been 18 months of getting and working with that population. So now every time I see one of those, I'm like, okay, we've got someone here that really has a good skill set, and he's someone that, 18 months out of uni now. So he's second year out of uni. All right, I think that's all for this slide. The next slide. Structured learning approach and supervised practice. So I think it's important, as I said earlier, for them to be able to observe an experienced clinician in action, to be able to understand the process and expectations of that particular role. And it's also, I think, important for them to be supervised and not just thrown out to do stuff and expected that they'll be able to do it. But it's more about being able to provide that guidance and feedback as to what they're doing. And I know of cases where the new grads are not getting that level of support, where they might get the opportunity to do joint sessions with certain team members, but then they're just expected to go and see all their clients independently, and no one ever checks in or sits in those sessions and provides feedback. So I think that's important. And if you don't have someone experienced in the team, as we've said before, there are opportunities for external supervision to be implemented. And I know with my team, we do offer remote supervision across Australia, and sometimes that involves sitting in on sessions, obviously with client consent and everything. We've got mentors that will sit in on client sessions and provide feedback to the therapist as to how they're conducting the session and things like that. So there are opportunities if you don't have someone experienced in that area. Review sample reports from other OTs to learn how to write effective assessment. So I think having sample best practice reports for them to review is really important. If you don't have an OT service established, it's something worth considering, because you need to be able to, for them to have something to refer to and to be used to use as a guide. And again, external supervision or mentoring can provide that as well. And then having all the reports reviewed by someone that's experienced, focusing on improvements, strengths, and necessary edits to make sure they're on the right path. And I know all of us do that in our own roles with supervision and mentoring. And I can say that you do see the great progress that mentees are making once they're taking on the feedback on board, and perhaps like an FCA report that might have logged 15 hours 6 months ago, they're now getting them done in 6 hours and with minor edits. So that's just the power of like good supervision and good feedback. But without that, you risk having someone just constantly just spend 15 hours on writing a report and you only being able to invoice, 6 or 5. Yeah, so I guess that's all I would say for this one.
Thank you, Angie. So, and if there's really burning questions about KPIs, you can throw them at us at the end. We shall choose whether we give any specifics to your numbers or with a number or anything as well, but we'll happy to answer questions about those if you've got a particular question. But now we're on to the supervision phase, so nearly towards the end. So it's all about offering the right type of support. So this is one of Cole's passion areas. So we'll have to just like put a timer on her if she's still talking in half an hour, kick her off. But no, that's right. I trust her to give us the short version. So Miss 7 is that supervision once per month is adequate for a new grad. So we've sort of already touched on that. That's not likely to be the case, but I'll let Nicole explain why that's probably not the case.
Thank you, Claire. And I promise I will be short and shiny for this one. But as Claire has mentioned, this is one of my absolute passion areas, is talking about supervision and appropriate supervision. So you've already heard a little bit from Angie about some of the importance of supervision and types of supervision. But I think we really, I guess, wanted to kind of hammer that home, because certainly one of the things that we see, I think all three of us see, is, I guess, when supervision isn't provided sufficiently or isn't protected time or isn't offered frequently. So supervision is utterly essential for all OTs. And I think OTs know that, but if OTs are working in a company or an organisation that doesn't have another OT that can, and they might ask for supervision or ask for mentoring, it can be, I guess, difficult to understand, like, why do they need so much supervision? And I guess the thing is that supervision it's actually really critical. We have an OT code of conduct, code of ethics, competency standards. The Australian Commission on Safety and Quality in Healthcare all state that supervision is something that needs the OTs need to be doing. So this document here, we've got the link up there as well. This is the professional supervision framework provided by Occupational Therapy Australia, and they recommend, I guess, pulling together all of those different frameworks and different recommendations, that supervision should be a minimum of 60 minutes. There is some thought that it could be up to 90 minutes, so 60 to 90 minutes, and practitioners that are less than 2 years require a minimum of fortnightly supervision. But as you've already heard from Angie, that might be weekly, and they do mention that it often needs to be dependent on the complexity of work and on the individual's needs. So for example, if someone coming into a new role, that weekly might be appropriate in that situation, or in situations of high complexity and demands, taking on new types of clients and new types of, I guess, clinical areas of practice. Okay, so supervision should be graded over time, and experienced OTs should still have monthly supervision. And I did see a comment pop up from Dave that said that supervision is absolutely critical for any OT at any point in their career, and we would all thoroughly agree with that. You've heard a little bit again from Angie about some of the supervision opportunities that should be offered. I guess we, really, take the approach that formal supervision is essential. So formal supervision is generally one-to-one supervision sessions, protected time for that. And that's sort of where that minimum of 60 minutes, I guess, of that kind of time is what we would be suggesting. But that there's also benefits for informal supervision. So, you know, one of the roles that I've worked in a private practice was that, you know, someone will go out on a home visit, for example, and they come back to the office and, you know, just having that debrief, like you get back to the office and having that debrief and that opportunity to just kind of mentally dump about how that visit might have gone. Ad hoc supervision can also be really important. You know, coming back at the end of a long day after seeing, you know, multiple clients and just feeling, you know, really overwhelmed, or, you know, myself, even the other day, I had my own sort of experience of, I guess, some vicarious trauma from a particular client situation that I went through. And, you know, just wanting to have a debrief and have, you know, some ad hoc support for the emotions and the experience that, you know, I was carrying from that particular situation. So there is benefits, and it can be really hard to sometimes set up enough opportunities for that. Often, you know, obviously people often have your experienced therapists are often the ones that are doing the billing, so they're out, you know, seeing lots of clients and things like that. But providing opportunities or forums or settings where you can provide some of that informal or ad hoc supervision as needed can be really important, in addition to that protected, scheduled, formal sessions. In terms of, I guess, types of, you know, supervision, you've heard again from Angie about sort of job shadowing. So, you know, the opportunity to follow somebody else and see how they do things when it's their client. But then there can also be that other situation where it's the new grad's client, but then they're having a therapist sit in and watch them or support them with doing that. And that's one of the things that I guess I love offering as part of my services is opportunity for people to follow me along. But also, I guess, you know, in my postgraduate teaching, that one of the things that we do have is people that come actually sort of do like just a 2-week kind of clinical placement. And even as really experienced therapists coming into, you know, I guess a specialized area in terms of sort of neurological OT in that space, the feedback that we consistently get is how beneficial that is for personal growth and personal development, and how much, I guess, that even after, you know, the advent of a few years, that we can sometimes just get into patterns or habits of doing things that might not be best practice. And so being able to be that lifelong learner and responsive to that feedback is really going to grow, I guess, you know, the outcomes that people are able to achieve for clients, as well as their own, I guess, you know, we talked a bit about billing, but I guess you can develop tips and tricks. I think, you know, one of the best things that I had when I worked for a company was, you know, sitting in on a very experienced therapist and just watching how he recorded his time after a session and the bits that he wrote down, and just, you know, just little habits, like he used to use voice notes and he used to do a few different things. And I was like, I hadn't thought of those things before, but that then suddenly made me much more efficient myself. And that wasn't even the purpose that I had been watching him do. So I think thinking about some of those sorts of things. Indirect supervision is, I guess, pre and post session, so not being with the person, through to distant or remote type of supervision. And, you know, I mentioned before that I'm a bit of an OT nerd, so I've developed like a course around burnout specifically. And in the research, I looked at like a huge number of journal articles around that, but the research really strongly shows that supervision is one of the critical things that will reduce clinician burnout. It also enhances work performance, builds problem-solving skills, builds job satisfaction, as well as that individual capacity. So it also has been shown research-wise to reduce staff turnover. So we cannot emphasize just how important actually providing really good supervision and enough supervision is. Thanks, Claire.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. Yeah, so I say you may just look at the dollar figure of paying an external supervisor, but, you know, you compare that to the dollar figure of if that new grad burns out and leaves, it's, you know, it'll pay itself back. It's worth the investment. Okay, the next myth, which is still on the idea of supervision, and was going back to our calendar had 1 hour supervision plus a separate line management meeting. And this is what this is related to. So it's saying that line management, clinical supervision, and mentoring are pretty much the same thing. I know Nicole would definitely disagree with that. So I'm going to let her explain her thoughts on the differences and why you need a bit of everything.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. So I guess the language that we tend to use when we're talking about supervision is, I remember when I was looking up a supervision course a little while ago, and when you look up supervision courses, for example, if you don't look up clinical supervision or professional supervision, you'll often actually get line management supervision type courses. I think there was one about like factory worker, like supervision, like being a supervisor on a building site type situation, because I guess that's some of the terminology that's out there. So when we're talking about supervision in this context for occupational therapists, we're really talking about professional or clinical supervision, which focuses on supporting an individual OT to learn and grow and develop knowledge and competence. I guess when we're talking about mentoring, it's a little bit broader. So that might include career development and support to achieve personal and professional goals. And so that might be in addition to professional and clinical supervision, as opposed to line management or perhaps organizational supervision, which is still really important to understand the organization and their objectives, the values of an organization, to understand KPIs and the organizational needs. Line management and organizational supervision doesn't always need to be by the same discipline as the OT, but we would strongly encourage that professional clinical supervision is, because of course it's about clinical issues, clinical needs. So that does need to be delivered by an occupational therapist. Both of those things have a role to play, but it can be really important that they are also distinct from each other, because it can be challenging, and I'm just going to talk about it from my personal perspective, but it can be challenging when the only supervision that may be offered is supervision within the company to meet the company's needs, when you perhaps may have, I guess, growth or things that skills and capacities that you need to develop individually. And there can be a sense that, you know, I probably felt in my early days, I guess, a sense of wanting to demonstrate that I was competent and I knew what I was doing in my supervision sessions. So not necessarily coming to those supervision sessions with someone from my organization where I'm being vulnerable and where I'm, you know, sharing the things that I don't know and the things that I'm struggling with. I wasn't going to go to my supervisor and say, actually, I'm feeling a bit burnt out. You know, because I didn't want to admit that. I didn't want them to think that I was a lesser clinician. I didn't want to, I guess, experience any sort of penalties or perceptions that Nicole wasn't coping or something like that. And so I protected and hid a lot of that kind of stuff, which wasn't necessarily very healthy. So that's where I guess that external supervision or mentoring can be helpful, I guess, around developing some of those capacities around, you know, resilience and focusing perhaps sometimes even on clinical areas. I work sometimes with OTs that need, you know, they're having some neurological caseload coming through and they just want to develop skills in that specific area. And they, again, without demonstrating to their employer that they don't know what they're doing. So I think it's really important to have some of those clear lines between what those roles are. None of them are bad. It's great to have excellent line management because that means you're entirely clear on what the organization wants from you, expects from you, and you're supported to achieve your outcomes. That's fantastic. You also need to have that clinical and professional supervision about exactly how you're going to do something and how and what you might say or do in those sessions with clients, as well as having, again, potentially that mentoring kind of perspective, which is broader around where are you going with your career? How can you build that skill? If you want to get to a senior level, what do you need to be doing and how can you create that? Some of the key elements of effectiveness, again, that some of this is from what the literature shows us about this, is that it's important to have a good fit of a supervisor. So Claire, I think, mentioned that, you know, supervisors don't necessarily want to be dumped with a supervisee, and likewise a supervisee not necessarily wanting to be dumped with a supervisor. So it can be important to have some choice around that, or opportunities for that, because there does need to be a good fit for that. Not everyone has the same learning styles or the same communication styles. So that's actually really important. We've mentioned again about it needing to be discipline specific and around finding ways of having that opportunity for timely support. It's important, I guess, you know, Angie's mentioned that you've got to be careful, I guess, around peer support, for example, and, you know, not relying on that if as something. But if you've got, I guess, some experienced and appropriate formal supervision in place, sometimes it is that timely support or other forums for support that are important, but it just can't replace that essential role of really good quality clinical supervision. So that's it. I have seen quite a few questions pop up around supervision. So we will try and get to those at the end, but I'm conscious that we don't have too much longer to go.
Oh, that's right. So we'll keep plowing through the content. We did note those, check them. Nicole is probably thinking of the best way to answer them. So I'm going to do my little bit now for the last couple of myths, and then I'm sure Nicole can tackle those. So if anyone that's asked a question needs to leave, we'll make sure we answer that in the recording before we do finish. So feel free to dump any questions in the chat as they come to you, and we'll make sure we go back to them at the end. So the last bit I'm going to cover, which is all about retention myth busting. So what can we do to actually train our staff well, those early career clinicians, and hopefully have them stay with us? So the first myth, which is all around sort of new grad programs, I suppose, and there's a bit of a myth that a new grad PD program is easy to put together. And you can hear straight away if it's a myth that we're busting, that's not the case at all. And this is what we're going to talk about, is a little bit more around sort of outsourcing. And when that might be a good move, because they're actually harder to put together than what you think. So this is a bit of a recap background. So our upper requirement is that we need to have 20 hours of annual CPD as an OT. Sort of resets on the 1st of December every year. There's no actual requirement that as the employer that you must provide that 20 hours. It's actually the individual's responsibility when they tick off and redo their registration. But as a new grad, I suppose if you're not delivering 20 hours of claimable learning activities in their new grad year, you're probably not doing enough because there's so much that they do need to learn in that year that they, just from their general, all the different training that they might do as a part of learning their work, that's all would fit into that requirement. 20 is probably the minimum that they should be getting anyway. And the whole idea of doing really good quality training is so that your OTs stay. And the reason that will happen is because if they're getting good training, then they're going to hopefully feel a little bit more confident and competent in what they're doing. And they'll be able to deliver a better quality service, hopefully start to get good feedback from their clients and actually have some wins, feel like they're doing a really good job. And that's sort of that feeling that will help them to stay with you longer. And basically some of the companies, what they will do is I think, okay, great, we'll put together a new grad program and we'll make that sort of our shiny attraction to recruit new grads. And it may be that maybe you've got a senior OT that's been with you for a year or so, like, yep, great, we'll get them to put together a program for us and we'll get a new grad just to come in. Can you just spend a few hours, put together a new grad program? And it's funny because sometimes it's the question that often, not too often, but I suppose does come up in some of our OT forums. It's like, hi, my manager's asked me to put together a new grad program. Does anyone have one they can share? Everyone that's ever put together a new grad program, just like, oh my goodness, do you know what you're asking for? The amount of intellectual property and time that's gone into developing a good quality new grad program is intense. So there's no one that's giving it away for free if it's decent, would be my thoughts on that. I might have people happy for you to come and sort of see what you're doing and doing it that way, but there's no real one that you can buy done for you that's going to be perfect for your company and your caseload and the actual individual needs of your new grads. So if you want someone to develop a new grad program, and you can call it a new grad program, or it could even just be the elements of what we've talked about today in terms of supervision, training, those sorts of things, without having the package name of a new grad program. But basically, to put all those things together, you need to either give your senior OT some time. So that includes space in their KPI. So if you've got them doing a full billable target of clinical work, don't expect that they can just pull something together to create some training program for your new grad on top of that. So you're going to have to reduce that for whatever time that depending on how much they'll need to put together, so that they can actually deliver that. But the other thing to think about is not just the time that it's going to take them, is their expertise. So do they actually have the ability to teach somebody and teach somebody well? And do they have the interest in that? So it's very hard for a new grad if they come in, their seniors kind of been dumped with the role of, train this new grad, and they either are still doubting their own competencies because maybe they're only a couple of years out, or they're just, I don't want to teach other people. I just want to focus on doing my thing. I want to be a really good clinician. I don't want to be an educator. I don't want to be a manager or a supervisor. So it's really hard. And then you run the risk of basically losing that experienced clinician because you've dumped them with too much responsibility to try and support your new grads coming through. So just have some really, honest discussions if you're expecting a senior to take on that responsibility about whether that's actually something they want, and if it's something they have the skills to do. So if they have absolutely no interest, then you can outsource some side of things. And even if they do have an interest, but they maybe don't have the skills, then it's definitely people like myself, Nicole, Angie would offer services where we can mentor like a senior clinician that's got the interest in terms of how they go about actually putting together a program. So they don't have to do it all by themselves. But at the same time, you could potentially pay someone to, like some of us, to come in and basically do it for you, but that's probably, a lot of cost involved. So if you've got someone on the ground that can do the legwork and just be coached to put things together, that's really helpful. So there's that expertise of actually pulling it together, but there's elements of a successful new grad program that may look like an initial cost up front, but can really save you time in terms of that senior therapist's individual time demands. So for example, some ready to go training. So I know that I've mentioned I've got like some FCA training. So I put together an online course on how to do an FCA for an NDIS participant, because there's some webinars out there, but as a new grad, because I say I know what students know at university and what they don't know when they're new grads, there's just too many gaps in terms of the clinical reasoning and the steps. So I spent a lot of time. I didn't actually count how many hours I put into creating this course, and I probably don't want to know, but for someone to emulate that, the amount of hours to actually put it into a step-by-step process, because I'm coming at it from an educator perspective, to a process that then the new grads can not only just learn for FCAs, but then think about it's based on an OT process. And, this can apply to other things that I'm going to be doing. There's lots more transferable skills. So even like, I think my course is to like $179. It's a bargain. If you compare that to like, oh, there's a $100 webinar, that might do the job. It's looking at really thinking about if you are going to outsource, can be a good move because it can save your senior OT from putting something together. But just really think about, don't just match, okay, I need something on FCAs. Google search, first FCA course, done, tick. Really go and think about who has put this course together, because sometimes they can be really good clinicians, not necessarily good educators. And a good clinician course might be perfect for someone with 5 years experience that can connect the dots and, they've got all that underlying OT process, clinical reasoning skills, but maybe not going to do the job for a new grad that's still learning those things. So yeah, definitely outsource, look at some options because it can save you time, but just ask some questions, do a bit of digging. And I know for some of the companies that have used my course, so they've actually sign up all their new grads to my FCA training to save their seniors some time. They actually got their senior OT to do the course first, to actually work out, is this how we do it? Is it going to match it close enough so that we're not sending them mixed signals about, our seniors are telling them to do it this way, the course that they did tell them to do it this way, and now they're all confused. So that's another strategy as well, is use your guinea pigs for your experienced clinicians to see if it's going to fit, and if it's actually going to be a time saver that way. But I found that by freeing up that time, because you're not actually just creating a tutorial that they need to run every week or a training program that's a lecture sort of type of thing, you can outsource that, even things that they can either do self-directed in their own time or pay someone external to come and deliver a training for you as a one-off. That means that those supervisors have the headspace and the time to actually deliver that individualized supervision. So, yep, okay, go do Claire's FCA course. There's 6 hours of videos there. And then when you're actually doing your FCA, I've got more time now because I haven't had to tell you the basics. I can go through and just talk about your particular client and how that applies. So it's, you can get the best of both worlds thinking about it that way. So even if you've got the senior OTs, ask them if they're interested, find out what you can do to lessen that load so they can provide that individualized support. And then our last myth to take us home is that giving early career OTs opportunities to supervise others or develop programs is great for retention. So sometimes, that's something that can come up, is that, and we often will see early career clinicians 1 or 2 years out, they're suddenly supervising the next load of new grads, or they're suddenly a team leader, or they're suddenly doing those sorts of things. And you can justify that to yourself as a business owner in terms of, look at all the career progression, the career progression is so quick. There's obviously so much opportunity. Surely they'll want to stay. Generally what we've found is it kind of has the opposite effect, and we overload them too soon. And it backfires and they get stressed, burnt out, and they end up leaving, which is not what you want at all. So just probably be really honest about yourself. If you think it's a great idea to get your previous new grads to supervise the next new grads, is that from your consideration of their actual what's best for them or what's best for the company? And just think about, is that actually the case that it's going to end up best for both of you if you do it that way? So like I said, the risk if they're not ready is that they will get stressed and burnt out. But also if they're only very early in their careers and they haven't quite consolidated their own clinical skills and they're now responsible for training the next new grads, you're basically going to be training potentially incorrect skills or the gaps that they don't even know that they don't know 1 or 2 years out. Then they are teaching the next generation of OTs coming through, and you're going to have this cycle where things are just going to get missed and the quality is just not going to be there. And ultimately, it's going to be poor service provision for your clients. And I know way back at the start, we talked about the risks of for your reputation, losing referrals, but really just think about it's our clients. The whole reason we're OTs and we're in health professions is to actually serve our clients and to do the best we can for them. So we always keep that in the back of your mind. If this was your the new grad was going out to see your grandmother, your son, your auntie, and sort of what their skills are like, would you feel comfortable doing that? Do you feel that they have the skills to be able to do a good job of that? And if you can't sort of feel comfortable thinking about that scenario, then chances are you need to give your new grad a little bit more support and really rethink the type of responsibilities that you're giving to them. So in terms of appropriate career progression, because at the same time, having said that, new grads come out, they're full of energy, they've got lots of ambitions, they'll see someone else in their cohort is now a team leader and they're like, I want that too. So we don't want to say, no, you're just going to be a clinician for 5 years, even though that was definitely the case when I was a hospital rotational OT. It's like, wait for someone to go on maternity leave and you might get a senior job with 5 or 6 years out. So you still want to, give them the hope but help them plan it and make sure that the responsibilities that you're giving them are going to, set them up for success rather than failure. So it's always good to embrace that enthusiasm that they might have. They might have a 1 to 5 year plan. Write that down and keep that in mind, and always go back to what opportunities there will be within the company that might fit in with whatever it is that they want to progress. If they want to be a clinical specialist, or they want to be an educator, or they want to eventually be a supervisor and manager. Write that down and always go back to that at least once every 6 to 12 months in terms of a more formalized PD plan and where that all fits in. But some things that are a little bit more probably achievable or appropriate could even be things like supervising students. So that's not, again, having your new grad supervise a 4th year student. As the 4th year student's going to throw lots of clinical reasoning type questions at them, which the new grad might still be wrapping their own head around, but it could definitely give them that opportunity for supervising like a 1st year student or a 2nd year that's just there to observe and to ask questions about, what does an OT do in this space? So that could be something appropriate for them. Or it could be that they identify they're super keen beans, they've identified it'd be great to have this resource, or there's this new tech option that's going to speed things up. I'd like to look into that. That's great if whatever they want to do actually isn't aligned with what the company, what their directions are and what can actually add value to your company. Definitely let them go, use that enthusiasm, but at the same time, don't sort of take advantage of that enthusiasm and think, okay, yep, still do your KPI and yep, test out that whole thing, get back to me in 2 weeks with a whole plan of how we're all going to run it together. That's not fair. So to show sort of your how you're valuing their contribution in that non-clinical way, reduce their billable KPI for that 2-week window, whatever that they might be working in on it. Again, that's going to show that you're valuing their time. They're not going to hopefully resent you because they've just, delivered this something that they're really passionate about, and you're still expecting them just to keep the dollars ticking over. So just thinking about basically, you can give opportunities, but just be responsible in terms of how you're guiding the clinicians to do that. And like Nicole was saying, sometimes having that external mentor or somebody to show that is possible, and and acknowledging that and supporting that by offering that for them can be really valuable as well. So I'm going to do a bit of wrapping up, and then we are happy to hang around for any questions. So just a few take-home messages. Number 1 is to conduct some detailed planning. So hopefully we've established now that employing an early career OT may not necessarily be the right solution for your company. So definitely look into that and think about that before you put the job ad up. Make sure that you're choosing the right fit for your company and the support that you can actually provide. So really analyze what support can we afford to provide, what sort of caseload do we have, what referrals are we going to get, what referrals can we say no to as well, and make sure that you're choosing someone that's appropriate for that fit. be prepared to invest early in terms of your time and finances. I don't think there's anyone that would say that you're making a huge profit in the first few months of employing a new grad. And in fact, most company owners delivering all these really good supports are probably running at a loss in terms of paying their salary, paying for all their support, and what they're actually bringing in those first couple of months. Outsource when you need to, but obviously be savvy about what you're outsourcing and do your research to make sure that you're actually going to deliver better support for your clinicians and what's already available in-house. And probably the main thing that we've touched on, even just in an hour and a half, there's so many different things to consider. So don't try to figure it out by yourself. It's okay for you to seek mentoring as well. So we're going to have all our details. I'm going to hand, Angie's just going to give us the 30-second version of everything she provides again, and we'll do a run through just to wrap up of a few other things as well.
Oh, okay, thank you. So yes, I do offer one-to-one mentoring programs for new grads, early career OTs, or any level career, to be honest, clinician. And the programs that I've structured are 3, 6, or 12 months. I also offer one-off supervision on specific clinical cases. I offer group-based supervision, team mentoring programs, report reviews, and I do have a team of clinicians and mentors in my team that have different clinical skill set to me. So psychosocial and peds as well. Thank you.
Angie's my go-to overflow when someone comes to me like, I don't do that. Ask Angie. One of her team probably will. So thanks, Angie. Nicole, what's your main wrap-up that you offer?
Yeah, so similar, I provide clinical and professional supervision Australia-wide over Zoom or Teams. It can be ad hoc or ongoing. That includes report writing supervision and mentoring for allied health. So I do also do that for non-OTs as well. As I guess OT mentoring, I guess, is one of my particular focuses. So building up like leadership capabilities or service development, like setting up a new OT service or a driver assessment service, and career development. I do some online professional development programs, so over Zoom, at staff meetings, or for teams and organisations, depending on their needs. And I guess have an online course available to prevent and manage burnout for OTs.
Excellent. Thank you, Nicole. And just for me, so I do a bit of the same as well. So I do some supervision and mentoring, either if you're a company owner and you're trying to look at, like I say, what we've been talking about today, we all do the same thing. If you're needing help to actually pull your program together or consider any of these phases, we can all cover those sorts of things for you. Nicole said she sits in on interview panels. That's something that I haven't actually done, but a couple of people have asked me, so I am happy to do that if you need that OT brain to screen what questions you're going to ask or who you're going to employ. But I also provide one-to-one support or group support for early career OTs as well. And even in terms of that, like a case conferencing type setup. So it's quite valuable to have that peer supervision available, or peer support available as an early career clinician. And if you've just maybe got one new grad, may not be anyone else they can bounce ideas off, but sometimes there's either myself or others might have a group of companies of similar cases and they want, they're happy to fund a group program, or you may have your own little team of new grads and you want to have someone externally facilitate a discussion. Something that's a bit different that I offer is called the Your OT Tutor Alliance. So that's actually like a PD membership. So it's very low cost. It's like $39 a month, but it offers live sessions and it's really focused on those, what's missing for early career OTs. There's lots of webinars on how to do this NDIS thing, that NDIS thing, or the specific skills. But my courses are very much going back to the foundations of just being a good OT and learning OT processes. So how to work in a multidisciplinary team, how to actually use standardized assessments appropriately, those sorts of skills. So I have on demand, I do journal clubs. Basically, if you're wanting someone to run regular CPD checking in for your staff, but you don't have a big enough team to put it together yourself, then that could be something you might want to look into. And I do have lots of online courses. So I've got the FCA one, I've got one on NDIS report writing, I've got lots of journal clubs as well that you can either buy the resources and run it yourself. Basically, you can just have a look on the website and see what's of interest, and I can do bulk enrollments where I enroll you all. For some companies, I've basically done like a private cohort of my course. So for my FCA course, I've actually integrated their templates and their forms so they can basically upload it and only their staff can access sort of that discussion board for their group, but they can find all their templates and example reports all in that one login training with all my general training with that. So yeah, have a chat to me if there's anything particular that you want to outsource. And just a few other things that we wanted to give a few shout outs to. So particularly around supervision. So Michelle Bahari is one of our OT gurus when it comes to supervision. So she's actually got some, like a little survey that you can, like a test quiz yourself, basically in terms of the quality of the supervision you're providing, either as a supervisor or as a workplace. And there's a white paper as well, and lots of research around good quality supervision. Dave, I'm not sure if Dave's still with me, but Dave's got lots of stuff. He's got a mentoring program as well. If you need PED support, Dave's your man, and has a framework called the 3S. There's lots of S's in Dave's framework, the 3S framework around support.
Lots of S's. You can find it on the featured section of my LinkedIn page. That's a shortcut.
Excellent. There you go. And like I said, when we drop the slides, I'll make sure they're all clickable so you can easily find these. Julie has been with us as well. So Julie, well, I say she was the brains at the start of this project as well. So she offers, similar to us, lots of different supervision, mentoring for either the business owners or the clinicians themselves. And if you're looking for some more external supervision, if we're not the fit for that's going to be right for you, then there's a new platform that Caitlin, an OT, has put together called Clinician X, which is about to be relaunched in a phase 2, where basically you can go in and search for an external supervisor. She's still working out the costings around what that might be eventually, and whether it might actually still be free for people seeking supervisors to be able to use. So watch that space, or get in contact with Caitlin if you're needing help finding someone. We'll make sure that you can easily find all our links, and I can drop them in the chat as well. But what I did wanted to do is open up for everyone, anyone that's still here and still awake, if there is any questions. And I know, Nicole, if you're sort of aware of those questions that were coming through earlier on, we can jump to those first as a starting point.
Hey, Claire, did you give a shout out to next week?
No, but I will. Thanks, Dave. Actually, do you know what? I've finished talking. Dave can do a talking. So I'll be back here, same place, same time next week, but with the focus on actually more the early career clinicians, probably more for them, their perspective. But I'll let Dave do a bit of talking while I check the chat.
I'll be really quick. Next week, Claire and I are going to get together and have more of a conversation style discussion. We're calling it Everything You Need to Know When Starting Your OT Career. It is for both people launching their OT career in those early career years, but also the people hiring them. We've done it before and had a lot of questions from business owners and people that were bringing. It was really a really fabulous discussion with some really good questions. There are people that are bringing on early career therapists, and I think some of it is because that's all they can find and they want to do a great job. They're really hungry for that knowledge. So we're going to talk about vision and values. We're going to talk about the logistics, you know, what you need to ask, how you need to interview them, just really how to get the most out of those early years and make sure that you burn in, don't burn out in your early career. It was a great discussion last time we did it. I'm sure it'll be unbelievable next week as well. We'll call that one the rehearsal, and this one's the main event. Claire, I'll pass it back.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, so I saw that there's been a little bit of answering questions in the chat as well, but did either Angie or Nicole want to speak to any of those?
I think the one that Angie has answered in the chat, but I wanted to comment on as well, was around, can a line manager be a supervisor if they have some good boundaries around that? I guess, look, it's a little bit of a grey area. As Angie has said, we would suggest ideally that these roles should be kept separate, because I think that it does help avoid, I guess a sort of a slight conflict of interest in providing that supervision and mentoring, and it means that the supervision can be a protected and safe space to be able to be honest and vulnerable, rather than sharing information with somebody that sort of also holds the power, I guess, to kind of, as Angie said, like enforce disciplinary action and approve leave. And just giving an example from my own external mentoring that I've provided, which I had an OT seek that from me because they actually had line management with a non-OT, another allied health professional who is the owner of the company, and they work in a space where there is a lot of interdisciplinary and overlap. So I guess they did have some shared clients. This other, I guess, owner of the company was quite an experienced therapist, and they had a really good relationship. But it turned a little bit sour when there was a situation where this therapist ended up needing to take some quite extended sick leave, and I guess became some complications around their return to work, and I guess some of the accommodations that they were perhaps asking for. And then that actually led to a little bit of a breakdown then in the clinical relationship, because this OT then felt that they were perceived poorly by their previously good line manager and supervisor type relationship, and leading them to seek external mentoring about how to change that perception in some ways and how to build up those skills and, I guess, competencies again coming back from that extended sick leave. So I guess I have seen that not be valuable, and personally, like I said, I've had an experience where I didn't feel safe or confident to be vulnerable in that space myself. So I would recommend that that is separate, and because I think it's very difficult to establish sufficient boundaries. Sufficient boundaries between those.
Yeah. And I would just add to that, Nicole, that I've been on the other side where I've had staff members that needed clinical supervision, but I was also their line manager, and I was finding it difficult, particularly when you're you're managing someone that might need to be performance managed, but you're also having to meet with them to provide clinical supervision. In my case, I was able to hand over the clinical supervision to a clinical team leader, and that just left me purely to focus on that. And that person was still getting supervision, good clinical supervision from someone that was separate, and it worked out better that way.
Yeah, great responses there. So I know, it's tough in terms of the cost of how that fits in as well, but again, it's the cost of not doing it that way that could actually end up costing time and heartache and losing a clinician as well. So any other questions that anyone has? What I might do as well, I might end the recording, and if anyone has a question they'd like to ask off the recording, I'll give you that opportunity as well. So for anyone who's watching the recording, thank you very much for sticking to it to the end. I'll make sure that wherever you're watching this, you'll be able to access the slides, be able to click on all the links. But if you do have any trouble find anything, you're very welcome to reach out to any of us, and we will point you in the right direction. But a big thank you to Nicole and Angie for sharing their thoughts today, and for everyone else that came along and contributed via the chat to keep the discussion. It was very valuable, so thank you for that. But thank you for watching, and we'll see you at another webinar another time soon, hopefully. Okay, stop my recording.